some resonance with what I'm sharing today. I wanted to present health as a network of relationships, looking at it from a systemic standpoint. And I'm really going to build on Donella Meadows' definition of system, which is taking in the three aspects of a system having elements, they having interrelationships, and there being a sense of purpose. So if you really look at health as a system which is having relationships with various elements, I've identified some of these systems here. Some of these elements here which we can spend time on. Health is not really something which is unidimensional. So while Lucas spoke about the key elements of food and movement, I think there are so many other aspects of health which sometimes we don't necessarily pay attention to. And this covers the emotional, mental, physical, social, spiritual aspects. So if we start with our relationship with time, I feel that so many times there are many of us who would say we don't have the time for good health. We don't have the time to go and buy the kinds of foods that we need. And we don't have the time to exercise because we have these deadlines coming. So time becomes something which goes out of our control. And if that is our relationship with time, then we will never be able to make the time for the things that really matter, that Lucas pointed to. What is our relationship with our work? Is it something that drowns us and it keeps us away from life, so to say? Is it our escape? Is it causing stress because that's really our way of earning our livelihood? Or is it something that we find joy in? And if it is the latter, then we will make time to integrate into our work things which give us pleasure, such as making the time for getting up, moving around, eating the right kinds of foods, etc. But if we feel it is something that gives us stress, then we will really buckle up and we'll really not be able to move beyond delivering the tasks that we have signed up for. The other aspect of relationships in terms of health is really our relationship with the feeling of awe. And this is in spiritual traditions and in studies relating to happiness, etc., gaining a lot of attention, primarily from the point of view of us being able to make the time to expose ourselves to events, to things, to situations that inspire this feeling of awe in us. And mostly it is nature that does this. So for example, seeing the northern lights, or seeing some beautiful insect, or admiring a bird, or listening to a wonderful kind of music. There are so many ways in which we can inculcate this feeling, and it really goes a long way in our well-being. Our relationship with nature. There are, I believe now, Nordic countries where doctors are prescribing being in nature as one of the treatments for patients, especially those who are terminally ill. But a lot of times, especially if we look at our current generation, children are growing up with a sense of fear about nature. They don't want to go and play in the mud. They don't, and I'm talking about in urban spaces. They fear insects. They run away from reptiles. Instead of looking at them with wonder and awe, they really fear nature. And if that's our relationship, then we may not feel comfortable going out in nature. And that's really sad, because nature has many healing properties, and there's a lot of research going on around that. The other aspect, which is more to do with our emotional and mental well-being, is to do with our relationship with words. And it's so interesting because a lot of us are into writing, are into speaking, but many times we are not necessarily very intentional or mindful about the words we use. In ancient times, words were considered to be like magic. So, and even today, indigenous cultures believe that you create as you speak. So if we are to look at the kind of words that we are listening to, that we are engaging in terms of conversations, and that we are speaking, it really helps us figure out whether those words are helping us or detracting, from our state of well-being. And the last aspect, before we get on to the body, is that of feelings. There is a lot of gender nuance to this aspect. And I do want to say that many times what we have found, and there are a lot of researchers to show different kinds, suppression of feelings and emotions really does not help in dealing with them. What we are taught from childhood is that, okay, if you're hurt, forget it, forget it and move on. If you don't like this person, or this person is bullying you or whatever, forget it and move on. But if we are able to fully feel our feelings and acknowledge them, we are in a better position to integrate them and to move on, rather than to suppress them and to cause some physical illnesses as a result of that. So that's a key part of our well-being as well. And lastly, our relationship to our body. This is very interesting because again, this has a gender nuance to it. How are we viewing our bodies? Is it a vehicle which allows us to go out in the world and just be somebody, or is it our vehicle for delivering our life's purpose or mission, in which case we need to treat our body almost like a temple. That's what we look at in India. So worship your body. And that means only ingesting the highest quality of nutrients and being mindful about everything that is going inside in terms of food, in terms of the air we are breathing, so on and so forth. And that also then feeds into the movement and how often are we moving. So Lucas talked about sitting as being a really not advisable for long-term times. And what I have understood is that sitting beyond 17 minutes at one point in time is really harmful. So that's really one of the big factors contributing to diabetes type 2 today. So if we really look at what's the one thing that will make a difference in our relationship to all these aspects, it's really this one factor of mindfulness. If we bring mindfulness into our relationship with each of these factors, we do have the ability to drastically uplift our health in many, many ways. But it is the absence of this mindfulness that causes us to exhibit unconscious behaviors and results in ill health. I just want to also now talk a bit about the factors that impact our health, and there are many, many more, but these are the few factors which I found have a deep impact on our health, and it really starts with our place of stay. For many of us, this is non-negotiable, but it has a big, big impact on how far are we from a nature kind of a setting. What's the level of air pollution? What's the kind of weather? Does it allow us to step outside often or not? There are so many things that go with it. How close is the food that is being grown? Or how far away is it that it comes to us from? We will cover food and movement in greater detail. So I'll go on to the rest of them, which is the next one is rest. I don't think many of us pay much attention to this aspect at all. So we just go on working. We ignore signs of, let's say, slight backaches, slight discomfort in the legs, slight heaviness in the head, things like that. And, in terms of eyes, that is again becoming a very big issue. And it's not just making the time to rest, but it's also the quality of rest. It is the quantity of rest. It is how often we need rest, and all of us are made up differently. So being able to recognize that for our own bodies, and that comes again with mindfulness. Social connections is a big one. There's a longitudinal study that was done by Harvard with a set of people for over 75 years, and I believe it's still continuing, which essentially indicated that people who had long lives had a really good quality of social connections. So who are the kind of people that we are engaging with? Are they really uplifting us? Are they helping us in our well-being, or are they really pulling us down? What emotions do they leave us with at the end of the day? That's really important. We've spoken about nature. The other aspect is learning and growth. It's really interesting. I find that there are people who specialize in certain aspects and they continue to work and grow in that field. But what really helps in brain development as we grow older and as our bodies start aging is to look up things which are completely out of context and new. So for example, learning a musical instrument, or a kind of a sport which is not that intensive, or qigong, for instance, like Lucas mentioned. So things which are out of our comfort zone are usually far effective in keeping us healthy. Addictions is an important aspect of our health, and I think all of us suffer from some or the other kind of addiction. Gadget addiction is another one. There's email addiction, there's all kinds of addiction. So it's not just about alcohol or substance abuse or cigarettes. There is many kinds of addictions, and it does. Mindfulness is again proven to be very helpful in being able to deal with addiction. So definitely something to think about. And then of course there is stress, which may be caused on account of any of these other factors which seem to be out of our scope of control. And there are again many ways of being able to manage it. But if we have a mindful relationship with each of these, we will find that our stress levels are minimized. It cannot be zero, but they are definitely minimized. So talking a bit about the food and movement, like I mentioned, I want to take a moment to talk about the food cycle. And again, this is something which I have observed, so it's kind of an autoethnographic representation of how I understand the importance of food in our lives. If we look at the place of stay that we have chosen, it really does determine the kind of foods that are available to us across different seasons. But irrespective of what is available, it is finally the choice of food that is determined by our conditioning, our previous experiences, and our understanding of what food is good for us or not. Hopefully, it's beyond what we like to eat. It's a little bit more about nutrition. And then it goes on to the important thing is to look at the source of food. Where is it coming from? If it is coming from a few countries away, then we can be sure that it is not something that is going to be good. And local is definitely, local and seasonal is the best kind of food for us. It does not need preservatives, and it is easier to source, also lower carbon footprint. The place of procurement, so for those of us who are fortunate enough to have farmers markets nearby, hopefully we can get fresh seasonal food, but those of us who are not, we will probably go to supermarkets, buy foods which are wrapped in plastics, create more waste, and not end up having a healthy experience in terms of eating. The process of preparation is also very important. So again, it comes down to mindfulness. Are we aware of the fact that oil and certain other kinds of products are not really good for the body? Sugar is a big one. And any items with colors, artificial preservatives, things like that. If we are adding all of those ingredients in our food, then there's really not much point in ingesting those foods. The quantity per intake is important. So latest researchers have shown, and there is a big movement here in India, I'm not sure about other countries, where we are talking about how much food do we really need to have. So as far as I'm concerned, I do something called intermittent fasting, which basically means that there is a gap of 16 hours at least in between my last meal in the day and my first meal the next day. And the reason for this is that that's the amount of time the body needs to digest a meal completely. Because we have been conditioned to have breakfast and have lunch and have dinner and have innumerable amounts of tea and coffee in between, and along with that go some snacks, that's really where I think the battle of the bulge comes in, and we really start to get into the area of obesity. And we can avoid all this by simply increasing the gap in the meals that we have, and looking at I think 2 meals a day are really sufficient for me. I don't feel deprived at all. And I feel that it's really good for the planet. I'm not having more food than I need. So I definitely would encourage everyone to try that out. In Ayurveda in India, there is a lot of study done on combination of foods. So there are certain kinds of foods which are not good to have with other kinds of foods, so on and so forth. But there is very little awareness that we have, and I myself cannot profess to have too much knowledge on this. But a good rule of thumb is to minimize the grains that we are ingesting and maximize the fruits and vegetables, fresh fruits and vegetables that we intake. And the more we can have raw foods, the better. The less we cook, the better. And that's really the thumb rule that I keep in mind. Millets are extremely popular now instead of rice, wheat, etc. So I'm really trying to cut down on wheat, on milk, dairy products, things like that. And I have seen, again, in various researches, papers, etc., this being something that is being highlighted as important for good health. The eating experience is really crucial, especially when we look at mindful eating experience. So we are seeing, again, increased instances of people being on their gadgets, either watching TV or on their phone or checking their email, and somehow managing to stuff themselves with the food. But the more we are conscious of how we are eating our food, how we are experiencing each bite and absorbing the nutrition, the higher our chances of being able to benefit from the food that we have so painstakingly procured and prepared. The last bit in this that I want to talk about in terms of the food is the gaps in between. So we spoke about the intervals, and it's really important to not get into snacking. And if we do have snacks, then have something like raw foods, fruits and vegetables, salads, not really go for processed or packaged foods. So getting into body movement, again, I think while the place of stay does play a big role in how we move our body and what are the various kind of facilities and spaces available to us, but it also is about our relationship to the body. If we feel that, we are just carrying around our body and not really paying much attention to it, not really focusing on toning it and keeping it healthy, then we will not want to move. There is also different views about fitness. So some people say fitness is overrated. I don't really care too much about the gym. I don't care about, this, that, or the other. And all these are going to overshadow our need to move our body. And of course, the time and the budget constraints come in. The one thing that I have learned is what keeps movement going is the aspect of making it joyful. So if we are able to find something that we find joy in, we are more likely to do that movement. So clearly Lucas seems to find a lot of joy in Qigong, and this person here in the picture seems to enjoy his swimming. We could find something that works for us. It could be dance, it could be anything, it could be running, it could be just walking. But only if we are able to find what we enjoy, are we likely to sustain it. And then the gaps in between, so sitting for more than 17 minutes, like I mentioned, is harmful. So what is really the lever for change? And I want to mention that this is a book which is very, very interesting. I definitely would recommend taking a look at it, by James Clear. It's called Atomic Habits. He also has an interesting newsletter, which I do recommend. It's really our ability to inculcate conscious habits. So if we know all this, why are we still not doing it? What gets in the way? It's the daily motivation. We can journal, and we can have a fitness instructor, and we can learn this course, and we can do this, but finally we have to do it. And what gets really in the way is a lack of conscious habit. So that's really the lever which we need to work with, and we need to think about. And to end with, I want to share this one quote by Naomi Klein, especially because on 20th of this month we have the World Localization Day coming up, that local food economies are essential for restoring our health and the health of the planet as a whole. What is good for humans is good for the planet, and that's really a good rule of thumb to go with. So I just want to say that I'm not an expert on health, and I just jumped on this topic because I feel very passionate about it, and my passion is driven from the point of view of my own experience, which was triggered by my husband having a heart attack when he was 40. And that really got me started on the path of good health. And I thought, let me share my experience and learning in whatever forum possible. So with that, I want to say thank you for this opportunity, Jason. And I don't know if there are any questions, but if yes, I'll be happy to address if I'm able to. Thank you.
I have a small question. How that 17 minutes limit is fine? Could you share with us?
Sorry, I can't hear you very well.
The 17 minutes.
Yes.
As a limitation. How does that?
So I'll need to get you the research behind it. But essentially, what I have understood is that in our blood vessels, when the blood flows, there is a certain level of deposition that keeps happening in the blood vessels, on the side of the blood vessels. And the more we eat fatty food, which is burgers, fries, and sugary foods, and all of these things, pizzas, the more that deposition. And with that, what happens is that our blood vessels keep getting narrower and narrower, leading to things like high blood pressure and heart illnesses and things like that, and also the sedentary nature of our routines leads to diabetes. So that was really the linkage that I understood, and hence what you mentioned, Lucas, has 2 hours, the 2 hours rule, looking away from the screen. I actually remember it as 20 minutes. I don't know why, but like every 20 minutes we look away 20 feet or whatever, just to give your eyes a break. And that's really and it's important to bring that element of mindfulness pretty much every hour in our work, to be aware of suddenly, how am I sitting, how am I moving, how am I eating. Water is something we haven't spoken about, so not being able to drink enough water, 2 liters a day, is also a very critical aspect that we need to pay attention to. So yeah, all really boils down to our mindfulness.
I have a question. Why do you say that local food is better than from a distance? Now, the reason why I question it is because it prevents actually people from taking benefit from food from outside, or living only in one area where they are deprived and continue to decay. So I think this is I don't see that as a positive.
Yes, and you're right, Klaus. From that perspective, it does not make sense. In fact, I was myself of the view that there are so many foods that are not available to us locally, so I want to source them from all over the globe. There's something coming from New Zealand, something from Australia, and I'm feeling so privileged I'm getting the best foods here. But the thing that I was not paying attention to, which I got to know only later when I attended some of these awareness sessions, is that the foods which travel for so long, and this is now getting a bit into the whole Eastern element and a consciousness side of it, it loses its potency and its nutrition. And to keep those foods safe, there will be certain preservatives that will go into it. The life of that food needs to be extended for it to reach us. And not only that, it takes a significant amount of carbon footprint for those food items to be delivered to our home. So imagine if I'm eating an apple which is coming all the way from New Zealand, and I call myself a systems thinker, I'm really trying to calculate the carbon footprint that it created, and trying to justify to myself that, is that apple really so important that I could not substitute it with something else? That's one aspect of it. And the other aspect, which I have understood and I haven't done enough research on yet, is it seems that the people who are local to an area, the soil that is in that area grows the kind of foods that are best suited to the body of those people who are staying in that area within that kind of climate. So in this climate where I am, it's a temperate climate. There's not too hot, no, not too cold. I don't need the kinds of foods which are grown in too hot and too cold areas. What my body needs is what is being grown naturally in the soil in this area. So there is this connection I have with the soil locally, which has been forgotten over the years because we are not really clued into these things and because of globalization. And that's really what we need to get back to, which is why there is so much focus on localization. And of course, the other aspect is the creation of jobs and boosting the local economy and reducing the carbon footprint. So those are definitely the other ideas. I don't know, Lucas, if you have something to add to that. Yes,
that's bad news for me.
I wanted to just remind you are in India. I grew up in Germany. In the Middle Ages, one of the most important trade routes was salt from Europe to India and Indian spices back to Europe. Would you think that is not a good thing?
And also, that's bad news for me because I'm living in Arizona. So I should start eat those cactus. What's my better choice? There's only cactus grown locally.
You
well,
must
maybe
grow it
You
yourself.
might have a balance somewhere.
Yes, Lucas was saying something.
Oh, thank you. There are studies that when you, for example, you spit on the earth next to the plant, or we have talked about the apple. If I take a piece under the apple tree, the composite of the apples will change in a manner that it's more healthy for my organism, as it's what Maturana calls an environmental drift of the organism together with the environment. And if you can accomplish your eating as part of this environmental drift, and this is also your solution, Jason, you have to grow your own food and you have to speed on the earth. It knows what to do, what to produce.
It's a desert. It's a desert.
Yeah, then you do hydroculture and you speed in the but this is also why it's not just rules, but it's more a design problem. It is not just that it's you follow a rule, but you have to invent this design in which our new existence and evolution makes sense, which what we need as an organism on a biological level. Thank you for allowing me to add this.
Yes, thanks, Lucas. And to your point, Klaus, whether I feel that was right or not, I don't know. Honestly, I can't say was that correct or not. But what I can say is about the situation right now, because I have a daughter and I'm looking at the next generations and what are we leaving them with. So I'm really looking at it from that perspective, that what should we be doing now? And to me, from where I stand and what all I have an awareness about, and it might not be complete, it does seem that local seems to be the better way to go. And to Lucas's point, I think, Jason, we do need to find ways of growing our own food. That's probably the best way we can support ourselves. In the future, there will be a big shortage of food at some point in time, and countries like ours might be hit. There might be many more countries that might be hit. So that is definitely something where we need to focus our attention on. I don't think schools are really gearing up to any such thing yet, but definitely something to think about.
If I could use two examples. One is if you have allergies where your system is taking its own immune system upon itself, having locally sourced honey, not honey from Mongolia, etc., is better because it assists almost like small droplets to allow the immune system to get back in order. So locally sourced. My horse that I have here, I give it seaweed. It's we've all come from the ocean. I grew up in the Midwest of Iowa, Illinois, and at one time you would see some of these older people have goiters because they didn't have any iodine. So when you're doing these rules of the road of what to do, You have to understand what system are you dealing with and where did that system come from. So just two examples of how a system operates and how far a system is extracted from its origins. So just
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
some rules of the
Absolutely.
road we need. We don't need rules. We need rules of interaction.
That's true. Yes.
Remy,
Thank you.
I have a question regarding uh, did you when you were educating yourself, did you come across the work of Candace Pert, like the molecules of emotion, or kind of the role of neuropeptides as a way to kind of bring these different ways of looking together, and that's also maybe for Lucas?
Not me. I don't know about
No,
Lucas.
no, the Qigong does it so well that you have from Chinese medicine, or you have this in Ayurveda too, that you
Yeah.
have a clear relation between the emotion and the organ that is affected, that produces the emotion, also, which is the helping organ, who is helping the liver. For example, the heart gives the idea to the liver, the energy of the heart, that then the liver makes the plans out. So if the emotion comes out, it's the qigong, or it's also the yoga, then can help you to it. And
Okay.
as an answer for the digestion is that the diversity is always more important. The diversity of greens, it's like an ecological relationship. If you don't know which organ to work on, you go for higher diversity in the greens you eat, and that greens change how your taste buds function. If you take enough wild greens, and then you won't eat anymore, you won't like to taste anymore the taste of something that makes you ill. So I think the Chinese and the Indian way is more close to habit, or to culture, because the peptides are really good if you know it, but it is not something easy to remember and to give somebody else.
Okay, since I have all these books around me, actually, that is a book that actually was within hand reach. I mean, if you don't know her work, and probably some of you will know it, she's famous for not having gotten the Nobel Prize, because there is a whole story about how she was being ignored, and the whole question of the way the male female dimension in science. But her work on neuropeptides is like the receptors are not just in the brain, and like everyone is obsessed about the brain, but also the digestive system. And so it's really about all the things you said is about movement, and actually then it relates to Jerry's work about that we need a logic for chemistry that's different from a logic of electricity, so to say.
Mhm.
But for this neuropeptides, they're created while we move around and we do things, and they regulate our mood. Yeah, I think it were the ones that have to do with endorphins and stuff.
Yes,
But
cannabinoids. The
yeah,
cannabinoid system is the
yeah,
body system through which we regulate all body systems. It's
yeah,
like the regulation system of
yeah.
our body, and that functions through peptides. Yes, please go.
Yeah, I just want to say it reaffirms this movement, and the way that our science is, that our models are all about some, I mean, for lack of better word, is a computer that's sitting on a desk, and there's no movement involved. So there's no conception of movement, because the problems, they don't say anything about movement, and that gets to some of the comments that Lobel made about I mean, measurement is movement, or I don't
Yes.
recall exactly how you said it. So I I just enjoyed your
Yeah.
I enjoyed
Thanks.
your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I wanted to also share this other book. It's actually a very humorously written book. It's very refreshing to read. It has got a lot of science in it, but it's very interestingly written. It's again written by a woman called Gilia Anders, and it's sold over 2 million copies. It's called The Inside Story of Our Body's Most Underrated Organ, the Gut. So in case any of you would like to read it, it's a light read and
Send it
very
to
informative.
Jason, and Jason
Ah.
might be distribute also or your book, both
Could
books,
you-
that we have a
Yes.
list of books.
Sure, sure.
Could you send it in the chat room, maybe the text of the title of the book? Could you
Sure.
type it in the chat? Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
And also your PPT, if you like to share, you can send you the PPT. Send me the PPT, and Lucas sent his paper already, so I'm going to post to the club.
May I add a question?
Yeah,
Please.
I would like to
Oh,
pose
you
some
go
questions.
first, please. Yes.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So I'm very interested in how some of these ideas, which seem to focus on very unique examples and singular topics or singular subjects and singular predicates, if you would, relate to more general concerns that are typically found in cybernetic thinking. That you would like to extend beyond the uniqueness of a particular fact or a particular example. And to this end, I found the definition presented by Ms. Singh of a system to be rather limiting and not broad enough to deal with many of the cybernetic issues that involve. And I will take here an example from her talk. And this is the issue of social connections and addictions. Now, social connections and addictions are a very subtle and nuanced set of terms, which if you try to explore them in the particular, you have a lot of questions about what should I do, or what would cybernetics say about this? And for this particular example, I would suggest that the social connections between a man and woman can be addictive. And one aspect of this is explored in Tantra and the tantric couplings that go on. At what point does Tantra become an addiction between the man and woman? And at which point is it a healthy social connection? How do you address this sort of issue?
Yeah, so, interestingly, the Western understanding of Tantra, the way you are describing it, is very different from my understanding of it.
I did not describe Tantra at all.
Okay, yes, I mean, just the usage of it. So Tantra is actually a whole science in itself, the way I understand it.
I've read several books on Tantra, and I understand that it's a science.
Okay, right. So to me, the way I conceive of it, it's really a way of transformation. That's really my view of Tantra. And I think addictions of any kind are really addictions, whether they are relating to social connection, whether they are about a relationship between a man and a woman, or it is about, like I mentioned, the phone. I had been addicted to an app which was not really serving me, and I decided to go ahead and delete it. And there are different ways in which one can address addiction. Like I said, mindfulness has been very effective in doing that. I don't really completely understand the limitation of the definition of systems in this context, which talks about the 3 elements. I use the Donella Meadows definition: the elements, the relationships, and the purpose. So I feel the purpose is what sometimes gets missed, and clearly there is a distinction between the purpose that is articulated and the purpose that actually exists. And that's really where, sometimes the gap lies. We could definitely not use the same definition of systems thinking for explaining everything, which is why I think we have so many models, theories, and constructs. But I think as far as addictions are concerned, there is definitely a very similar way of addressing most of the addictions from my view. I don't know if Lucas, you want to add something to that?
Could I respond to that first?
Sure.
Yes,
So
please.
the issue becomes, if you have the social connection and you have addictions, then what is the boundary? What is a semantic or syntactical boundary that is related to your notion of systems? Your notion of systems apparently is not very facile for addressing the question of the boundary. And yet the issue of boundary is always part of the decision-making if one is dealing in such matters.
Yes, may I answer? Now I think I have a very practical answer on one level, on the level of the nervous system, also in practicing Tantra. So, and how it relates to awareness, because Tantra let's say a form of Tantra very intimate together. It's a relation of two nervous systems producing neurogenesis. The neurogenesis means the new growth of new brain cells, of new nervous cells. And now you have this movement, which is either outward or it's internalized, which is also Tantra. And then you have like a strict ruler, for example, when there are certain things for what you eat, what you do, that helps the production also of new brain cells and of neurological patterns, neuroplastic patterns, which grow with that. Once they are produced, it takes these new cells have about 4 hours in order to attach themselves to a new area of learning. If they are not attached in this, like through mindfulness, to a new area of learning, this is, so far I understand, the practice of Tantra, then they become toxic in the brain or in the body. And we need more and more of doing or sex or whatever you want to do in order to get rid of the toxics that you have produced by producing brain cells, by doing sexual interaction, for example, but having no learning to go with it. If you have a learning to go with it, then you have a natural cycle of intimacy and producing of new neuroplastic patterns and new brain cells adding to old ones. And there's never an addiction, because the cycle of producing, integrating, reproducing gives a natural virtuous circle. So this is my explanation for the nervous system.
I really question this sort of response. My understanding of Tantra, in the sense of the ability to endure for numerous hours of continuous intercourse, is one of its prime features, and that this is authentic within the Tibetan culture. So continence for 4 hours is only an amateur at Tantra. So I don't think the neuropsychological aspects of it come out of growth of neurons.
You're like a conservative Qigong teacher. They're saying exactly the same thing. Everything under 2 hours of Qigong practice is not really Qigong. And they say the physiological changes, they are not relevant enough. But I think that this is a very old school attitude to Tantra or to these Qigong exercises, which does not yet include like this neurophysical context, which is now coming into existence through research in different fields.
Lucas, with all due respect, my origins of the rhythms start at the quantum level and then are composed time-wise into longer and longer intervals, so that I really don't find this 2-hour limitation to be of much concern to me, because the composition can go on indefinitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing I do want to add is, it's interesting, once we understand this pattern of addiction and we apply mindfulness, we can actually choose what we want to get addicted to. So for example, in my case, I've decided I'm going to be addicted to the ukulele that I'm now learning to play. And every time I feel like, oh, I want to do something, or I want to go and get up and have chocolate, or something which I know is not too good for me, I will go and pick it up. Or let's get addicted to movement. And we need to find ways of that bringing us joy for that addiction to come into place, because addiction is a way of life. I feel all of us are addicted to different things. It's just, some of us are addicted to things which work, some of us are addicted to things which don't. So we can be mindful and choose our addictions too.
So maybe this one question: did you come across Gandhi's garden concept that he took from Aristotle? And is it very wide known in India at the moment? Because Gandhi, for creating India, took this idea of Aristotle that the garden is the birthplace of democracy, as you learn how to produce the food you need, as you learn what kinds of medicine you need, as you learn how to build your economy, from getting up in the morning, preparing, harvesting, understanding the difference between vicious cycle and virtuous cycle. Is this tradition of Gandhi still very alive in India? Do people know and talk about this?
Well, I have to say that our younger generations are not very clued in, and I can't claim to know too much about it. I haven't really delved into studying too much. I'm not very proud to say that. But there are people who are very much into his work, and I don't know to what level the awareness is. But at this time, certainly there is a lot of attraction towards going back to those teachings of our wisdom teachers and our elders, and Gandhi is definitely one of them.
Thank you.
Lucille, we haven't heard from you yet.
Yeah, I was listening with interest. I'm trying to manage myself that way. Actually, I'm trying to be very careful in balancing these different needs that we have. I mean, body and mind, and especially for us who is doing an intellectual work, somehow is in a straight contradiction, because we overuse our brain, our head, and we forget that we have a body, that we have feelings, social relations. I mean, this is something that is really, I feel it as a true problem in my life, because I'm aware that I am unbalanced on this respect. There is too much brain, too much thinking, and too few physical dimension in my life. And even if I try to contrast this imbalance, I feel it's always at stake in my life. And that's a true problem.
Yeah. And the lack of social connections, genuine spaces where we can have these kind of conversations, is really becoming a very big focus area. It's in fact the core of the research work that I'm doing in my PhD. And I'm really committed to offering more and more such spaces. And it combats the feeling of loneliness, which is supposed to be a bigger killer than cigarettes. And it is the truth of COVID. It is the truth of aging. It is the truth of so many of us nowadays who are digitally hooked and distant from the real humans, which is why our communities are breaking down. And we are seeing so many rifts and I just think it's helpful to have these conversations in these kind of forums, along with, of course, having the intellectual discussions and debates, but having a space and a window when we can all just talk about what's going on in our lives, you know, beyond the papers and beyond the books. There are humans. And I'm actually part of a writing group where there are 5 of us who are writing now about the use of emotions and feelings in the academic world and why that is so unacceptable. And I do feel very disconnected, not being able to use it because it's not acceptable. You know, usually it's not acceptable. So I think it's time to bring about that change, certainly.
Actually, at least in my experience, this contradiction is so deep that even in the yoga courses that I did sometimes, then it happens that you do the exercise together, you spend half an hour, 1 hour together, but you are strangers one another. I mean, then you go out of the session and everybody is on his own or her own. There is no social exchange. I mean, we keep strangers. So again, another separation. There is, okay, we share body exercise, but we didn't share our social life, our, emotions that are not related to the physical exercise. And this is the other side of the coin. There is, it's another distortion of what we are doing in our intellectual life. I don't know if it's also your experience, but at least it was mine in different cities, in different moments of the life. But then I experienced this further separation. I mean, even in the right place for joining body and mind, but then it was not really a real unity. There was very much body and almost no social or mind exchange.
Yes. And I think it's really this lack of spaces where such expressions are welcome that is causing so much of feelings of isolation in the society amongst individuals. So I would only encourage all of us to create these kind of spaces and to encourage people to talk more about what's going on in their lives, apart from, of course, the work that we are doing, because we all are really humans. We just forget it and we feel it's not okay to talk about it. But what will we talk about? We are humans. We do need to embrace our wholeness. And I think practices like Qigong really are rooted in that wholeness, because they connect us with the larger universe in that sense. And yoga, definitely.
I'm very curious about how your writing group and their discussion of the feelings and emotions and why they are suppressed in the academic world. This, I think, is a very intensive activity that in many ways separates the academic world from the real world. And so what does your group discuss under these topics?
I don't think I'm at liberty to talk about it right now. I will need to go back to them and tell them that there was interest, and maybe at some time we come and present about it and share. But it was very interesting. We all came from different backgrounds. One is a medical doctor, one is a faculty, one is a dean at a university, one is an alumni of Stanford, and she is now into stand-up comedy. So we have such diverse backgrounds, yet we all feel the same way about emotions, and we all felt that we need to find a way of bringing this conversation back into academics so that we can make our representation more whole and not divisive.
Yeah, just go ahead and invite them over. You see, yesterday in the challenge session, we discussed the movie named The 33. It's about the 2010 Chilean miner rescue operation. It's a miracle. It's a magic, actually. I highly recommend everyone pay attention to that movie. Now, the whole story started from the emotion of the woman at the beginning. She slapped that minister of mine in Chile, and started the whole story. So we discussed that case yesterday. Very interesting. I had shared GPTs with you guys. That is Club of Remy is the place that everything can be discussed as long as they are reasonable. So we should welcome here to another session. Or maybe Lucas wants to do another session on Qigong.
Yes, sorry, I was typing. I was just, the desktop standing up to a sitting world is still missing. What did you ask me about Qigong? Do we want to end with a session of Qigong?
Little
bit?
Yeah, we need to do a little bit exercises.
Yes.
And I still need to figure out how do we do this in a Zoom environment. Back in my teaching years, I had my students practice a special stimulation game to discover their own feeling of qi. And they were screaming when they realized that it was true. It's something very, very much un-Western. Yeah, perhaps we can try that on Zoom as well and get everybody stand up.
Yes.
Doing some practice.
As a one.
Okay, sorry, I need to leave now, but
yeah,
I think
if there's no more questions, we can terminate. Thank you so much for a very interesting session. And I think I'm going to pass the video to people who are not moving a lot. So to emphasize that. Okay.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Lucas, I look forward to learning Qigong from you.
Yes.
And